This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. Today's podcast clip comes from an interview with Julian Major from Visit Victoria.
Advertising effectiveness specialist, or I am the guy that you go to for pricing issues, or whatever like that. And I sort of didn't see myself fitting nicely into either of those two streams. I definitely am not the sort of person that can be good in a sales role, and I just didn't like the idea of really pinning myself down to one sort of specialist research area, particularly at this at that stage of my career. So I thought of staying in a research agency environment would have been nice, but I feel that you would have got diminishing returns on how much you're learning, and it would have been sort of getting into the routine of doing the same things unless you really want to push hard into one of those two areas. So yeah, the opportunity came up at Visit Victoria. Had a little bit of experience in the tourism world. Tourism Australia was a client for some time during my time at GFK, and so worked with their research team there. So I really liked the, I suppose, product category of tourism. Found it super interesting, and such a unique space being attached to a sort of destination marketing organisation, and yeah, it came in at an interesting time for the organisation. So I came in when there was no one else in the consumer insights team. My predecessor had left for another opportunity in the Victorian government, and it took them a while to hire someone new for that role. So I don't recommend starting a new job when there's no formal handover period, but I suppose that in itself is a really good learning exercise, and breeds a certain resilience in you. And it's sometimes you need that shock challenge, particularly when you feel like you've been at a certain pace and been in a really comfortable environment where you're really confident in what you're doing all the time at GFK. So came in, the team doubled to 2, finally got someone else in that team, and just moved up to the head of, it's recently been a job title change, consumer insights to research and insights, moved up into that head of position. It's the same thing, just a change of title to better reflect what we do. But yeah, it's such a fantastic place to work. It's different every day. And what I like most about being on this side of the fence is that you can really see the outcome of your work, or you can not even that, you can see the cog that research plays in the wheel of the organisation more holistically. So you're just one part of something that feeds into, that informs this, which leads to this, which has that sort of outcome. And at an agency, you do have good relationships with your clients, but there's always you will always miss certain context of what the research is being used for, and the other things that are going on at the organisation at the time. So I like being in the inner circle rather than just doing a piece of work and delivering it and saying, yep, good job sort of thing. The job never ends here. The one interesting thing about it is you really need to enjoy the sort of work that the organisation does, because it's your life day in, day out. Sometimes at a research agency, you'll get some clients that are like, this is the most boring product category, or this sort of work is not the most exciting. If you weren't interested in tourism, or you went to an organisation that sold toilet paper or whatever, that could be really interesting. But if you don't find it interesting, it's going to get old quickly, because you live and breathe that product category and that work. every day. So, yeah, that's sort of why I wanted to move over, to see, and to work with people who aren't just research people at the end of the day. That's a good thing about being in a research agency, that camaraderie of you're all doing the same thing, all working to the same goal to try and grow your research agency, hire more people, do good work. You all know what good work is. You all know what bad work is. Whereas on this side of the fence, you're working with people who acquire major events, people who do marketing campaigns, people who do, cooperative marketing, business events is another arm of Visit Victoria. So, you get to see what so many really smart people do day to day, and, think about, how can what I do help them do their job better ultimately, or, create better outcomes.
Yeah, I'm a South Australian, so I know like Tourism SA, and I mean, I don't know much about like Visit Victoria or anything. Chris Villani, who you know as well, he worked for like the equivalent in Sydney, didn't he? Or
Destination New South Wales. Yeah. Do
you see them as competitors?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And it's really interesting, I suppose, depending on what sort of business unit you work in. So I think there's elements that are highly competitive and areas that are incredibly commercial in confidence. So I know all the researchers at all the other states, and there are, certain things that even if they're cheeky and ask you a question, you say, well, I'm not answering that. That's you'll have to wait and see what we do sort of thing. But there are some areas where collaboration and cooperation is really beneficial for us all as a whole. So there are a number of research projects that we do which has sort of like a federal state funding model, and it primarily works in international tourism, because if we know more people come to Australia, then yes, there's a competitive job to be done in making sure that Victoria is on the list or New South Wales is on the list, but there's an element of everyone will win to some degree if international tourism does really well. And from a research perspective, it just makes a lot of sense to pool our resources in that area, whereas the most competitive market would be interstate tourism for sure, because there's limited number of people. People don't do multi-state journeys like they do in international, so it's a finite market, and you're trying to gain market share and do the most effective work. Whereas international, I would say, is one area where we collaborate the most, and there are also some areas where we get together twice a year as part of a research committee with Tourism Australia, the States, Tourism Research Australia, the ABS. There's benefits in us all collaborating on those national pieces of research and making sure that they're as good as they can be, and we're sharing knowledge so that anything that is done at that national level is informed by our experiences as states. But it's a unique environment in that sometimes, even though we are competitors, you do have to collaborate and talk to each other, and they're all lovely people from a research perspective, which is great. Don't deal as much with the marketing teams and the others, so I can't speak for that. But researchers tend to be quite friendly people, and the nature of your work brings you together, I suppose. Yeah,
that's awesome. I had no idea it worked like that, and I don't think a lot of people would. And it kind of makes a lot of sense, like, because Australia, we're competing internationally against other places, other countries essentially, and then almost blocks of countries when you think of like Europe or Asia, for example. Like if you're doing an Asia trip, it's not unheard of to go from Malaysia and then going to Singapore, for example, because they're sort of neighboring countries. Or you almost kind of see the US as multiple states, but you'll go there and people don't usually just go to one, I'd assume. So you're kind of competing, and so you're kind of pooling those resources together, but then you're then competing against everyone else, but then you're competing against your collaborators.
Yeah,
domestic
definitely.
level.
And, you know, just because more people come to Australia, it doesn't mean that those visitors are divvied up as what market share is right now. So, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, Victoria was number 3 in terms of international visitation and expenditure behind both New South Wales and Queensland, and we've since overtaken Queensland to be number 2. And you know, it is a market that can change under the right conditions as well, particularly with something like aviation access being such a large driver of what gets people to, you know, go to your state first of all, and then, you know, stay longer. If you can get more direct flights, people will take those direct flight options and stay a longer part of their trip in your destination. So it is a really weird thing of, you know, there's a benefit if more people come to Australia, but it's still competitive, and post-COVID it's going to be more competitive because how rare would it be in any product category where your market essentially goes to zero and you have to restart again? And, you know, every state is going to see that as an opportunity to say, you know, the old world is out. We want to come back as the biggest, or we want to come back not in the position that we were before, but bigger than ever. And that's going to be a trend that you're going to see around the world as well. In that there's, you know, destinations that have really struggled and seen the impact of not having tourism, and they're going to go hard when the planes start flying, and when there's a finite pool of international travellers.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you completely. It'd be interesting to see how that does take effect, and then if and how long it does take to revert back to the old way. Like, so if I was to get on a plane, and this is just anecdotal thinking, but if I was to get on a plane, unless I had a vaccine that I knew was effective, you know, I wouldn't be going to New York City, because that's was a bit of a hotspot, or, you know, Los Angeles or Barcelona or London or any of these places that are massive international household names of everyone who's pretty much alive. But I would be considering going to some small island nations that are around Australia that haven't been impacted by COVID as much, and are probably more safe destinations. And so you think market share will change in the short term. But I do wonder whether it's kind of like the case of, you know, you have some food poisoning from like a local bakery or some frozen berries or something, and it's a short-term hit, and then repertoire buying and habitual behaviour kicks back into gear, and normal behaviour occurs. Like, how long until, you know, say, I don't know, what's the number one international destination, do you know? You might know.
The number one, well, it would depend on how you define it as well. So it would be an Asian hub destination, just because of
probably Singapore or
Singapore I mean, Singapore per capita,
Dubai or something. But how many people who leave the airport?
Thailand would be high up there in terms of international visitation. Bangkok is a hub. It's in Southeast Asia, around highly populated areas, and it's a popular holiday destination. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's an interesting question. It's like the whole, you know, Samsung, their phone setting on fire sort of thing. You know, they're still pretty big, and that was forgotten pretty quickly. But I think safety and security has always been the number one consideration on people's minds when they're picking a destination. And Australia's always been perceived really strongly on that, and the research that we're seeing at the moment is that has increased in perception, and it's probably the case as well for a lot of destinations that have either handled COVID well, or in general have this perception of being having lots of wide open spaces and nature, like places like Canada and Australia. So I think there's a benefit in that you definitely can't rest on your laurels, I suppose, because yes, you know, the US and the UK are in a really precarious situation at the moment in regards to COVID, but they are very appealing holiday destinations, and there will be a time where you can go there, and sometimes people are easy to, people forget quite easily. So I think there's a little bit of truth in both of what you said. It's not one or the other.
So there's probably a short-term change, maybe long-term revert back, and then it'd be interesting to see what happens. I think it's rather cool because it's a real-world experiment. On a global level. You're not going to get a bigger sample size than this.
No, it's going to be, and this is all happening at a time where our access to data and information is so much better.
Yeah.
So, the evaluation of what has happened over this period, not just from a tourism perspective, but a health perspective, and, all sorts of different angles and all sorts of different product categories have been affected. There's going to be some good research after the fact, I suppose, in what all of this has done. But all the forecasts that we're seeing are saying the travel won't get back to its baseline levels of pre-COVID till 2024. So,
wow,
recovery is a long-term game at this point. That's the forecast. Things can change pretty quickly. There are some people that would be a lot more optimistic than that, but recovery will take some time. It's such an unusual situation. Whilst COVID has affected other categories, very few have been taken down to zero in terms of international visitation to us in New Zealand, and quite a lot of other countries are having to do similar things as well. So really, interesting times ahead.
I think it's, and like you said, the market went to zero. The Australian government made a decision to shut international borders, and a lot of this is for the Australian audience, I suppose, and maybe international who don't know, a lot of our state premiers who control the borders. Did you know the premiers controlled the borders before this?
No, I didn't really, to be honest.
I didn't either,
and it's something that would differ country to country. My understanding is it's either not possible in the US to do that, or it's really, really difficult, and the people wouldn't accept it. But you learn something new.
I had no idea. At his will, Stephen Marshall, who's the South Australian government premier, could be like, no one from here or there or anywhere can come, and I think people can leave, but they just couldn't come back. I had no idea they could do that. That's pretty interesting. But what was I saying? What were we talking about just before that? I got a bit diverted.
I can't remember. It's happened before, though.
It's all changed. Oh, has it?
Yeah, Spanish flu, they did the same thing. Australia shut its borders, which, access was quite different as opposed to huge planes coming in every day. But international borders were shut and some state borders were as well. It's interesting that's our best case study going back 100 years, but
just think, and that reflected on the financial markets. Like back in March, Qantas, which is over 100 years old now as an airline. I think I really enjoy it. I know some people don't like Qantas flights. I quite enjoy the service, and their share price was sitting around $7.50 a share. And within about a week or so, I can't exactly remember the dates, but the lowest point I saw it reach was $2.02. And this was right when numbers were getting worse in the US and things weren't looking as good. We had bigger lockdowns in Australia. And now I think they're sitting at about $5.50. And the international market has not even opened up. I think that's crazy.
I think that does talk to, even though we say things like, the market might not be at base levels until 2024, that might come across as, pessimistic. But, at the end of the day, travel before this was a category that had just been growing year on year. I think Australia had about 15 consecutive years of growth in international visitation, despite the fact that Australians could travel outbound with cheaper and cheaper options and more options available to them, and they were doing that. Despite that, domestic tourism was always growing, not at the same rate, but still being a solid performer over a long period of time. So, Australia is a popular destination to come to, and Australians love travelling themselves, and that desire, that underlying, what I would call a need, is not going to go away. A lot of people, even though travel is discretionary expenditure, a lot of people don't consider it that way. They consider it something that, is more important to them. It's really important for people's, I don't think it's necessarily overstating it to say it's important for people's mental health to be able to get away, to spend quality time with their friends and family. So I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand when borders open, when more options open up to people. And Qantas is strong enough of an airline to get through this as well. Not all of them will be. Hopefully we all get past this, and aviation's a big employer, hotels are a big employer. There's a lot of businesses that are really doing it tough at the moment. So hopefully when we're vaccinated and safe to travel, we benefit from it, and jobs come back and the market comes back strongly.
I actually quite agree.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY, for my take on the marketing issues of the day.